1 deltoid. Origin. Lateral third of clavicle, acromion, spine of scapula to deltoid tubercle. Insertion. Middle of lateral surface of humerus, deltoid tuberosity. Action. Abducts arm, anterior fibers flex and medial rotate, posterior fibers extend and lateral rotate. Nerve. Axillary nerve, C5, 6, from posterior cord. 2 erector SPINAE-SPINALIS. Origin. Spinous processes. Insertion. Spinous processes 6 levels above. Action. Lateral flexion of spine. Nerve posterior primary rami. 3 erector SPINAE-ILIOCOSTALIS. Origin. Iliac crest, sacrum, lumbar vertebrae. Insertion. Ribs, cervical transverse processes. Action. Extends and lateral flexes spine. Nerve. Posterior primary rami. 4 infraspinatus. Origin. Medial 3/4 of infraspinous fossa of scapula and fibrous intermuscular septa. Insertion. Middle facet of greater tuberosity of humerus and capsule of shoulder joint. Action. Laterally rotates arm and stabilizes shoulder joint. Nerve. Suprascapular nerve, C5, 6, from upper trunk. 5 interspinalis. Origin. Spinous processes. Insertion. Spinous processes 1 above. Action. Extension of spine. Nerve. Posterior primary rami. 6 latissimus dorsi. Origin. Spine T7, spinous processes and supraspinous ligaments of all lower thoracic, lumbar, and sacral vertebrae, lumbar fascia, posterior third iliac crest, last 4 ribs, interdigitating with external oblique abdominis, and inferior angle of scapula. Insertion. Floor of bicipital groove of humerus after spiraling around teres major action. Extends, adducts and medially rotates arm. Costal attachment helps with deep inspiration and forced expiration. Nerve thoracodorsal nerve, C6, 7, 8, from posterior cord. 7 levator scapulae. Origin. Posterior tubercles of transverse processes of C1-4. Insertion. Upper part of medial border of scapula. Action. Raises medial border of scapula. Nerve. Anterior primary rami of C3 and C4 and dorsal scapular nerve, C5. 8 levatories costarum. Origin. Transverse processes C7 to T11. Insertion. Posterior surface and angle of rib below. Action. Elevates ribs. Nerve. Posterior primary rami. 9 obliquus capitis inferior. Origin. Spinous process of axis, C2. Insertion. Lateral mass of atlas, C1. Action. Rotates atlantoaxial joint. Nerve. Suboccipital nerve, posterior primary ramus of C1. 10 obliquus capitis superior. Origin. Lateral mass of atlas, C1. Insertion. Lateral half inferior nuchal line. Action. Lateral flexes atlanto-occipital joint. Nerve. Suboccipital nerve, posterior primary ramus of C1. 11 rectus capitis posterior major. Origin. Spinous process of axis, C2. Insertion. Lateral half of inferior nuchal line. Action. Extends and rotates atlanto-occipital joint. Nerve. Suboccipital nerve, posterior primary ramus C1. 12 rectus capitis posterior minor. Origin. Posterior process of atlas, C1. Insertion. Medial half of inferior nuchal line. Action. Extends and rotates atlanto-occipital joint. Nerve. Suboccipital nerve, posterior primary ramus C1. 13 rhomboid major. Origin. Spines of T2 T5 and supraspinous ligaments. Insertion. Lower half of posteromedial border of scapula, from angle to upper part of triangular area at base of scapular spine. Action. Retracts scapula. Rotates scapula to rest position. Nerve. Dorsal scapular nerve, C5, from root 14 rhomboid minor. Origin. Lower ligamentum nuchea, spines of C7 and T1. Insertion. Small area of posteromedial border of scapula at level of spine, below levator scapulae. Action. Retracts scapula. Rotates lower scapula back to rest position. Nerve. Dorsal scapular nerve, C5, from root 15 serratus posterior inferior. Origin. Spinous processes and supraspinous ligaments of T11L2. Insertion. Posterior aspect of ribs 9 to 12. Action. Assists forced expiration. Nerve. Anterior primary rami, T9-12. 16 serratus posterior superior. Origin. Spinous processes and supraspinous ligaments of C7-T2. Insertion. Posterior aspect of ribs 2 to 5. Action. Assists forced inspiration. Nerve. Anterior primary rami, T2-5. 17 splenius capitis. Origin. Lower ligament nuchae, spinous processes and supraspinous ligaments T1-3. Insertion. Lateral occiput between superior and inferior nuchal lines. Action. Extends and rotates cervical spine. Nerve. Posterior primary rami of C3, 4. 18 supraspinatus. Origin. Medial 3/4 of supraspinous fossa of scapula, upper surface of spine, bipinnate. Insertion. Superior facet on greater tuberosity of humerus and capsule of shoulder joint. Action. Abducts arm and stabilizes shoulder joint. Nerve. Suprascapular nerve, C5, 6, from upper trunk. 19 teres major. Origin. Oval area, lower third, of lateral side of inferior angle of scapula below teres minor. Insertion. Medial lip of bicipital groove of humerus. Action. Medially rotates and adducts arm. Stabilizes shoulder joint. Nerve. Lower subscapular nerve, C5, 6, from posterior cord. 20 teres minor. Origin. Middle third lateral border of scapula above teres major. Insertion. Inferior facet of greater tuberosity of humerus, below infraspinatus, and capsule of shoulder joint. Action. Laterally rotates arm and stabilizes shoulder joint. Nerve. Axillary nerve, C5, 6, from posterior cord. 21 transverso-spinalis multifidus. Origin. Laminae of vertebra. Insertion. Spinous processes 2 to 3 levels above. Action. Extends spine. Nerve. Posterior primary rami. 22 transverso-spinalis rotatories. Origin. Transverse processes. Insertion. Spinous processes 1 above. Action. Rotates spine. Nerve. Posterior primary rami. 23 transverso-spinalis semispinalis. Origin. Transverse processes. Insertion. Spinous processes above an occipital bone, only semispinalis capitis part shown. Action. Extends head and spine and lateral flexes spine. Nerve. Posterior primary rami. 24 rapezius. Origin. Medial third superior nuchal line, ligament nuchae, spinous processes and supraspinous ligaments to T12. Insertion. Upper fibers to lateral third of posterior border of clavicle, lower to medial acromion and superior lip of spine of scapula to deltoid tubercle. Action. Laterally rotates, elevates, and retracts scapula. If scapula is fixed, extends, and laterally flexes neck. Nerve. Spinal accessory nerve, C1-5, spinal nerve C3 and C4 for proprioception.